Okay, Zoe's joined us. Hi, Zoe.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi.
How are you?
Everyone.
Oh, say hello.
Oh my
Hi.
gosh, we get to see him. Hi,
Yes,
Dan.
here he is. His first event. He's wearing his outfit. But we'll see how long he lasts before he gets real mad at having to be here.
Yeah, well done on YouTube for being here. I mean, it's
Yeah,
really
here we are.
impressive.
Uh-oh. Oh no. Oh no. Well, yeah, we're doing our best, you know. And this is a very topical event for us. So it's all great. Yeah. Hello. Oh, Branwyn, you look like you're on like a TV show.
I know it's a good setup, isn't it? I'm just about to move house, but
Amazing. Hello, everybody.
So for those of you just joining us now who didn't hear, the event's already being recorded, just so you're aware. And we have around 40 minutes for the presentation by Veronica. And then after that, we'll have around 40 minutes for questions and the discussion. So if you have any questions at all, you can either come on camera or write them in the chat, and I'll be moderating the chat to make sure that you're heard. And we hope to have a really interesting discussion. It's such a timely book. We're very excited.
The baby has been taken away for now, and then I'll probably have to take him back in a bit, but for now it's all good. The recording is working, right? Yeah, it's recording.
Yeah.
Lovely. And the slides are working. Wonderful.
Yeah, I hope you're very proud about my slides.
That's very profesh.
I have to tell you, like, I don't think I've done slides in a really long time. And then someone's like, you have to do the slides. Like, what? But I actually had a lot of fun, and I did them at UC. Very personal. It's a very personal story, really. So.
Nice. That's what I liked about, I mean, well, I like lots of things about the book, but I really liked the fact that it was your story at the same time as being a research project, you know. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Sorry, that was a bit of a, oh, is he okay?
I'm going to put him down while I go and get my food.
Oh, okay. I have the baby back.
It didn't last long, so.
I know. He seems to be fine.
It's fine,
Yeah, it's your story, and it's also an interesting story for me at the moment. For anyone who didn't see, there's a very small baby. He's 5 weeks old, and he's over there, and he seems to be fine. But I think that this topic is something that is so important and interesting to so many people. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it from a personal and a professional standpoint. Yeah. Lush.
Shall we get going?
Yeah.
Great.
Oh.
So this is Zoe and I'm Branwyn, and together we run the LSE Digital Ethnography Collective, which is a little collective we set up in 2019. Is that right?
Yeah.
2019. Just wanting to bring together different scholars of digital ethnography from around different departments and different universities, and it's grown into this amazing global community that we're so happy with, and bringing together people from all over the world and working on really interesting stuff. And it's been really interesting in the past year thinking about what kind of events we can have and what's useful, and it's so nice that we can make everything so much more accessible now. So we're really pleased to be joined by such a big global audience.
It really worked out. I was going to say, because we kind of put off doing Zoom events for ages, didn't we? Because we were like, oh, you know, it's kind of nice to have the in-person thing and whatever. There's lots of universities in London, so we thought it would be just like a London hub, which is nice too. But actually, when we did our first Zoom event, after like a year of doing nothing, there were so many people came, and we were like, oh, shit, maybe we should have been doing this from the beginning. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
So now we're fully digital. Do you want to introduce yourself quickly, Zoe?
Yeah, I'm Zoe. I am, what am I? I'm a PhD researcher in the Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics. well, I should be in my 4th year, but I've just started maternity leave for a year. So I'm basically trying to stretch out the PhD for as long as possible. So I'll be there until like March 2023, I think, which is kind of mad, seeing as I've done so much. I don't know, I've done a lot of my PhD already, but I research the online influencer industry, and I've done like a sort of long-term ethnographic fieldwork, both digitally and offline with that community industry. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. And I'm Bronwyn. I'm also at the LSE, but in the Department of Anthropology. I also did a very long PhD of 7 years where I was looking at infrastructure and mobility in Palestine. I just finished last month. So I use a lot of social media in my research, both as a method and as a field site. And Zoe and I met at a symposium for media, was it not? Oh my God, it was so long ago.
Yeah, it was our PhD one that we had to organize as part of our program, and you were one of the presenters.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah. And we decided we needed to bring together digital ethnographers. So here we all are.
Yeah, here we are. And we're so happy to have you, Veronica. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, and yeah, we're really excited about this, partly because it's so timely, and partly because, you know, it's like Zoe said, it's something we're all thinking about, particularly parents and new mothers, but even just during the pandemic, thinking about the profiling and the kind of surveillance aspect of technology has become something that's, you know, sadly a universal worry. But we're really excited to have Veronica Barassi with us today. So Veronica is an anthropologist, the mother of 2 daughters, and professor in media and communication studies at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of St. Gallen, as well as the chair of media and culture at the MCM Institute. She was previously a senior lecturer in the Department of Media and Communications at Goldsmiths University in London, where she launched, together with her colleagues, the Goldsmiths Media Ethnography Group. Her work has appeared in top-ranked international journals and edited collections, and her first book, Activism on the Web: Everyday Struggles Against Digital Capitalism, was the product of years of ethnographic research funded by the AHRC and the British Academy on digital participation and social media campaigning. Her TED Talk on what tech companies know about children has reached more than 1.6 million views. At the moment, she is launching a new project called The Human Error, AI, Human Rights, and the Conflict over Algorithmic Profiling. But today she is here to talk to us about her fantastic new book, How Tech Companies Are Profiling Us from Before Birth. So Veronica, I'll pass it over to you now.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I am really happy to be here. I would like to be in London. I miss London a little bit, but I'm very happy to be here. And actually, it is true, having a global audience, it's phenomenal. I think this is a very positive aspect of the pandemic, if we can see some positivity in it. Right, so today what I want to do with you, I divided my presentation in 2 parts. In the first part, I want to really talk to you about the making of the Child Data Citizen Project and how it came about, and how it was really much the product of a very personal and autoethnographic research journey. And then in the second part of the presentation, I want to kind of walk you through how I organized the book and the main ideas that I explore in the book when it comes to datafication and ethnography and the understanding of what really is happening today. Now, but let's start first from the personal. And oh, look, that's me when I was a little kid. And this is and I chose this photo because I really wanted to show you how part of the project was also had a lot to do with how much I reflected on motherhood and also on my own childhood and the traces and the implications and the values that I gathered during my childhood. But the very starting point of the Child Data Citizen really came here. Between 2013 and 2014, in 2013, I was pregnant with my first daughter, and she was born in 2014. And she was born at a time in which I was writing my first book, which was Activism on the Web. Sorry, I'm trying to move the camera because like that, so you see the slides. It's she was born while I was writing Activism on the Web, and I don't encourage anyone to write a book during maternity leave. But during maternity leave, what I was doing was spending some of the mornings writing the book, and then a lot of the afternoons I was spending it with new parents and groups of other parents within the NCT community, but also within other communities in my neighborhood. And what I started realizing it was that there was a real issue at heart because I was noticing that a lot of parents were producing a lot of data traces. And what I also was noticing it was that the data traces that they were producing were not only consumer data traces, but were data traces that had that talked and could be used to represent children as future citizens. And that's why the very idea of the Child Data Citizen started to emerge then. And here I want to say something about how I see ethnography and why I think the ethnographic method or ethnographic practice is particularly important. Well, I got a PhD in social anthropology from Goldsmith, and I was really trained by the best, I think, in the field, because I was also co-supervised by the media department. And so I owe a lot of my understanding of anthropology and the relationship between anthropology and media and ethnography to people like Nick Coldry, like Natalie Fenton, and David Graeber as well. And one thing that I learned throughout my training, it was that when we think about ethnography, and this is something that emerges really well also in the work of Sarah Pink, we're not only talking about a research method. We are talking about an approach, a practice that has a lot to say about our theoretical understandings and how we build theory, how we kind of connect to the world, and once we connect to the world, we ask questions that bring us into a theoretical dimension, right? And this is what happened to me. I was writing my book, and then all of a sudden I started to be confronted with all these questions. And I write this in my new book, The Child Data Citizen, in the introduction. I say, as days went by and my maternity leave was coming to an end, as well as my book, I started to realize how much personal data of children is produced from the moment in which they are conceived. Not only my fellow peers and myself included were recording important medical data on mobile apps, but we were extensively sharing photos of our children online through public or private social media platforms. As I was writing about online privacy, surveillance, and data cultures in the context of activism, I realized that we had very little understanding of what was going on within family life. So the Child Data Citizen project started from like this, from an ethnographic observation and a research question. And it also started because I found myself, I was in London and I was surrounded by a very vibrant ethnographic context, which was the context of new parents. And so I really kind of jumped in. In 2015, I just started building the project and starting to analyze what was going on. And I remember that at the time, what really struck my attention, it was how much political messages of children were being produced on social media. And this is actually quite a funny anecdote. And when I was setting up the theoretical grounds of the Child Data Citizen, Sonia Livingston asked me to write a blog post for the Parenting for a Digital Future. And I wrote a blog post which was titled, "My son is an anarchist, a communist, and a feminist," which was really reflecting on how much political data was being shared of children and how this data could be used in the future to profile them politically. And Sonia was quite funny because Sonia actually, when she received the email, she misread it and she thought that I said my child is an antichrist instead of an anarchist, which was kind of a funny moment. But anyway, so I started designing the Child Data Citizen project, and then something really major in my life happened because my husband had been relocated to Los Angeles for work. And I just had been made permanent in Goldsmith, and I really didn't want to leave Goldsmith. I didn't really want to live in London, which was my home. So we started living this crazy life between London and Los Angeles, also, which was also possible because I had a sabbatical, and I also got a research grant and a buyout. As I started to live between London and Los Angeles, I started to realize that I had a lot to gain if I compared what was happening in the UK and the US, because I was effectively being exposed to two very different data environments, which collected the health data of my children, the doctors. They collected the educational data of my children, so all the nurseries or after school activities and so on. And so I decided to build a cross-cultural ethnographic study. And in the meantime, I got pregnant for the second time. And when I got pregnant for the second time, it was 2016. And I was, again, living between London and Los Angeles. I spent half of the time in London and half of the time in Los Angeles. But also what I was realizing in 2016 is that a lot of things were changing, and were changing so rapidly. So between, for instance, 2016 and 2017, we've seen the development of AI technologies in the home. And also we've seen major advances in algorithmic profiling and in AI innovation, right? So as my second daughter was being born, she was being born in a very different data environment than my first daughter. And I kind of started to analyze these two data environments as a cross-cultural personal journey. And I decided to really kind of, at the beginning, I was worried about defining the field of research as an anthropologist, you know, which one was my field of research. But I had the I was exposed to both contexts. And so I decided to kind of start analyzing them in cross-cultural perspective, right? And this is, again, me writing about how this came all about. As I was living between London and LA and being exposed to the deification of my children, I came to the conclusion that I had much to gain if I considered the relationship between the UK and the US context. Armed with pen and paper, I started documenting how it felt to live in a world where not only me, my family and children were being datafied, but also where, as a parent, I had very little control over how the data of my children was being produced and shared. Hence, I became a participant observer in my own life, and I started taking notes. This autoethnographic research enabled me to start tackling the lived sensory experience of datafication. And when I talk about the lived sensory experience of datafication, I can tell you exactly the feeling that you feel as a parent who's concerned about your child's privacy, but can't find yourself in a situation where you do not have real choice. So every time that I found myself, for instance, obliged to sign terms and conditions, or in situations where I really lacked choice, I wrote about them. And so I wrote about, for instance, the day that I went into an indoor play area in Los Angeles, and my daughter was meeting her friends. And we arrived, and imagine that you have like this crazy situation, like a lot of parents in the line. We had just arrived. We had been in the car for ages because there was so much traffic, and my little baby was screaming her head out because that's what babies do. But my eldest child, she really wanted to go and see her friends, and all of a sudden I arrive at the counter to buy the tickets to get into this play area. And the woman at the desk tells me, oh, well, you have to fill in your name, your child's name, your address, so home address, your email, your telephone number. You can also add your social media accounts. And I was just like, why do you need all this information? And she looks at me like a little bit surprised. And again, imagine the situation, children crying, people behind me. She looks at me surprised and she's like, well, because for insurance purposes. And I was like, yeah, but can I opt out? Or is there a way that I can see a data policy or something? And she was like, well, you know, lady, if you want, you don't have to buy a ticket, right? So, and I looked at my daughter and she had taken off her shoes and I was like, well, you know, you can't, I have to. And I just gave away all her details, right? So as a parent, I kept on being exposed to all these contradictions and all these situations, and I really wrote about them. I also wrote about techno dependency and how much phone usage and the struggles with my husband and so on. But having said that, I also, with the project, with the Child Data Citizen project, I also wanted to go a little bit beyond autoethnography. You know, understanding the sensory experience is important, but when you're doing ethnography, it is also about other people. It is about also the life of others and understanding the context and the cultures and the clashes and the encounters, right? So for this reason, I decided to work with families and interview 50 parents, both in London and in Los Angeles, which had children between 0 and 13 years of age, so whose personal information online was actually ruled by the Child's Online Privacy Protection Act. And I also conducted 8 months of digital ethnography of 8 families sharing team practices on social media. So I followed what they were sharing on social media, and I interviewed them again, and so on. But when I was trying to choose and to find a way to design my research, I was very much influenced by Escobar's idea of pluriverse in design. So this idea that we have to kind of really try to that, you know, it's impossible for us to grasp the richness and variety of human nature, but we have to try, right? At least it could be our Kantian a priori goal, right? And so I kind of really tried to interview a wide variety of parents, and I interviewed parents who were not only diverse in terms of ethnicity, so there were Asian, Latinos, Indian, Black, Indigenous, multiracial, and white, but also in terms of real cultural and national heritage, which is what you find in cities like London and Los Angeles. So I interviewed Afghani parents, Mexican, Brazilian, Indian, German, Italian, Hungarian, Icelandic, Zimbabwe, Scottish, and many others. I also made a genuine attempt to seek parents from different classes. And so I interviewed parents that had very low income jobs. So they could be nannies, cleaners, buskers, or working in admin but low paid admin. And I also interviewed parents who actually had really high income jobs, like lawyers, film producers, journalists, and people working in marketing. And as much as I could, I also tried to find very different family situations that challenge the heteronormativity of family life. So I interviewed gay parents, parents who were divorced and had to juggle complex living arrangements, single mothers who had chosen to adopt a child. So this was my attempt to really create a pluriverse, right? Now, but my search for a good project didn't stop there, because there was another problem when it comes to understanding really the datafication of everyday life, and we wanted to understand data and technologies. I felt that simply focusing on my autoethnography or focusing on parents was not enough. So I decided to do a platform analysis, to complement my ethnography with the platform analysis. And I kind of started to think about platform analysis as a method, as an ethnographic method, right? Because I was really determined to understand the ways in which companies used, collected, profiled children's data. And it is for this reason that I decided to complement my ethnographic findings with analysis of 4 social media platforms, 10 health tracking apps, baby apps and pregnancy apps, 4 home hubs, and 4 educational platforms. So the analysis really consisted in the study of the promotional culture of these platforms, of their business models, how they promoted themselves, how did they understood themselves, what were their corporate storytelling strategies. I also looked at the data policies of these platforms. So what did they say about children's data, or generally data, and what did they say they did with it? But also I kind of tried to go a little bit beyond that simple analysis of what was there, to actually look for ideas of research that I could follow. So for instance, I followed the news on privacy scandals. And obviously during my research project, there was the Cambridge Analytica scandal. There was a lot of news that I was kind of just following for the sake of understanding what was going on. But also I actually followed the news involving patent applications, because I thought that it was very interesting to understand what were these companies up to, what type of patent were they applying for. But the way in which I did this platform analysis was, again, in my opinion, very ethnographically informed, because I found myself analyzing these platforms simultaneously as a researcher and as a concerned parent who wanted to find out how my children's data and my own were being collected. Now, so this is this is how I came about the Child Data Citizen book. It was the Child Data Citizen book was pretty much the product of years of research. That was a multi-method research, but it was also very personal and very autoethnographic research. And I don't know if any of you have read it, but I think Zoe read it, which was a good thing. But the way in which I tried to write it, it was really to try to bring all these elements together, to talk a little bit about what was happening in my life, but also connected to the life of others, but also connected to what was happening on platforms. So this is how I structure the Child Data Citizen book. The book is dedicated to my daughters, because I thought that it was an important research. I was trying to make an important point, because I really think that children today are the very first generation of citizens that are being datafied from before birth, and we do not know the implications of this, as I will show you later. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about the content of the book, and then maybe I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions also on the first part about the methods. Now, I decided to, the book is divided in 3 different parts. The first part is the child, the second part is the data, and the third part is the citizen. The first 2 parts is created by 2 different chapters. One that is called Digital Routines, and the other one that is called Datafied Families. Now, for those of you, and I seem to have spotted Dana Jorge in the audience, who's done amazing work on this, but also Sonia and many others. For those of you who work on children's technologies and the relationship between media technologies, the Child Data Citizen book is a bit of a sin, in the sense that at the moment we see, especially in the work of those scholars that work on children and how they use technologies, we see a lot of work being done to give agency to children and to show that children have their own understanding of technologies, and they also need to be understood as citizens or engaging with these technologies, right? And in the Child Data Citizen book, I kind of do the opposite, because I stripped children totally from their agency. So I wasn't really interested in analyzing what was happening to the child on the ground, in the sense of what children were doing with technologies. What I was interested to analyze, it was how the child was being constructed by the data traces that were being collected and created around him or her, but also how the child was being raised in a profoundly transformed society that was the product of the emergence of surveillance capitalism and the encounter between surveillance capitalism and family life. So the first part of the book, which actually focuses on the child, it really focuses on the child as a discursive phenomenon, rather than what children do with technologies. But what I do in this first part, I really want to show what changed within family life. And in the first chapter, I look at, I question the very idea of techno dependency in family life, and I propose a different and alternative narrative to this question of techno dependency. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have watched, for instance, The Social Dilemma. But at the moment, a lot of debates around social media and technologies are very much connected to the idea that these technologies are addictive, and that we are being all addicts, and that these technologies are actually designed to be addictive, which is true. Now, when I was working with parents, what I started to realize is that there was a lot of tensions in family life, and it also happened to me and my husband, for the amount of phone use. And parents spent a really good amount of time negotiating this tension. So there were arguments between partners about the fact that he is always on the phone, or she's always on the phone, or she's addicted, or this is compulsive behavior, and so on. I myself started taking journals about how much I used the technology. And sorry, I'm checking the time because I'm kind of aware of time. And there is a part in the Child Data Citizen book where I really explore one moment in which I'm sitting in the car and we're stuck in traffic, and I'm playing I Spy with my eldest daughter. But then I'm actually talking to my husband, saying, "Oh gosh, you know, I feel very proud that she doesn't have any technologies with her, and that, you know, she can actually entertain herself just simply by playing I Spy." And then I couldn't resist about picking up my phone like 20 times in the space of almost 40 minutes, right? And then so I kind of started I wrote down what I looked for in the phone. Why did I pick up the phone so many times? And it was all sorts of things. You know, I looked at news of Brexit, because at the time it was about the news of Brexit. I looked for a cot, for a different cot bed for my daughter. I wrote to a preschool that I had registered to for my eldest daughter. I did a lot of different things, right, whilst playing I Spy with my daughter. And as I started realizing this, what I realized, and I explore in the digital routines chapter, first of all, I show how most parents remember a time where you didn't have to be online all the time. And also what I realized, it was a lot of parents were framing this as techno addiction or techno dependency, and I found that very frustrating, because I was looking at psychological literature as well on techno dependency, and I thought that it was not really granted, right? So basically, in the chapter, I look at this dimensions by showing how maybe what we need to do is not really blaming parents or thinking about techno addiction or individual problem, but really what we need to do is to look at the complex relationship between technology, temporal practices, and capitalism. And I show how in the history of capitalism, we have always created technologies that were able to change people's temporal behavior. And I also show that with the rise of surveillance capitalism, all of our services have become so datafied and so over-connected that we often pick up the phone because we have to do things that before we used to do offline. So this is kind of the big transformation, this transformation of our routine, our digital routine. But there is another fundamental transformation that I explore in the first part of the book, which is the datafication of everyday life. I talk to many parents that actually talked about the datafication of everyday life and the increased amount of data being collected from the family as something that was in evolution. And but what I also found out it was that there was a real discrepancy between the stories of evolution. If the person that I was talking to was a well-off or highly educated individual, or if it was coming from a low income, or maybe also a less educated environment, right? And I confront, and in the chapter I actually talk about the stories, which was quite interesting, because I found the two stories, the similar stories, in LA and in the UK. So in LA, I interviewed a guy called Mike. All my names are obviously anonymized, and they're not real. A guy called Mike who was high class. He worked in government, local government, and he was super, well educated. And then I interviewed Mariana. Mariana was a Mexican immigrant, and she was working as a cleaner. And if you listen to their stories of datafication of family life were completely opposite. And the same happened in London. I interviewed a guy who's called Dan, who lived in central London, and he was working in IT for a digital marketing company. And then I interviewed another Alexandra, who actually was working really low income admin, and she had emigrated from Eastern Europe. And again, the very stories of datafication of family life there were so different, so strikingly different. Mariana and Alexandra talked a lot about the violence of identification. They talked about how all of a sudden all of their services, their GP, their bank, their school imposed them to go online and to share the data of their children, but they didn't really know how to do and to use these services. And they started realizing that all these services were actually accumulating a lot of data of children. They were concerned for privacy reasons, but they didn't really know how to defend themselves. And whilst Mike and Dan, they literally used the same language, because they said things like, "Oh yeah, I was ahead of the game. I knew what was happening with data," and so and they were kind of telling a story that was almost inevitable. And I found this very interesting. I found the idea, when we talk about the identification of everyday life, I think we have to talk about we often talk about the privacy divide, the fact that minority groups are often more exposed to privacy harms. But we often do not talk about the very experience of identification and how much divide that there is in that experience. In the book on datafied families, in the chapter on datafied families, I also talk about the rise of what I define the cursed digital participation. So really this idea that we do not have a choice. And especially with the pandemic, we do not have the choice. After moving from LA to Zurich, and my daughter was starting her new school, and of course, I had to create a Google Classroom account. And I asked and begged for a change in policies, but there was nothing that I could do, right? And it was her new school, and I had to create the Google account with name, last name, and the name of the school, right? And so this idea of cursed digital participation. So the first part of the book really focuses on this experience of everyday life. The second part of the book, I keep an eye on, Zoe, stop me if I'm going off too much. But the second part of the book, actually, I instead of going to the details of data, the type of data that is being collected from our homes and from children. My main point is that often we talk about data as personal data. So we have personal data and we have sensitive data. But actually, we don't really understand that many of the data is contextual. And there is a clear difference between the structures and environments and anthropological practices and beliefs around different forms of data. So for instance, in the health data and the educational data chapter, there are two different chapters, but they're kind of very similar in their structure, because what I do, I show how both in the UK and the US over the last 20 years, we witnessed a datafication of these sectors with large-scale financial and governmental incentives. And there was very similar also discourses by governments, this push towards datafication of embracing big data. What I also show in these two chapters is that the big tech, and especially Google, are trying to gain a monopoly over the datafication of health in both countries. And I also discuss how much of this data is being used. So we're not only having two very different sectors like health and education, they are being datafied, and they're also being invaded by big tech. What we are also seeing is the rise and establishment of practices of profiling. And to give you an example, I use the idea of personalized learning. So how education is being transformed and increasingly from practices of profiling and personalized learning. And I question these practices. I question what does it mean having an education sector where students are identified for their background, or for their ethnic background, or for their class background, or for what they do at school and so on. And then they are targeted with educational content that, according to algorithms, should be right for them, right? And in the chapter, again, what I wanted to tell you before is that a lot of the Child Data Citizen was about reflecting also on my own childhood. And personally, if I hadn't been exposed to so many different forms of knowledge, I don't think I would have the education that I have today. So basically what I do in these two chapters, I look at health data and education data, but I also show how these sectors are being transformed by the big tech and by the promotional cultures and ideas of the big tech. In the chapter 5 and chapter 6 is that I look at other two types of data. One is home life data, which is actually a term that I coined in 2018 when I wrote a report for the ICO, which was signed by the CEO of Privacy International, Guy Solte, and it was supported by Jeff Chester from the Center of Digital Democracy in the US. In the report, I talk about the emergence of home life data. So when we talk about the data that is being collected from the homes, we can't think only about personal data. We need to understand that the majority of data that is being collected from the home is also about household habits. It's about family practices, about contextual transformations within the family. It's about a lot of different issues, right? It's about biometric data. So a lot of this data is also associated to the single individual. In the report, I highlight the problem of household profiling, because a lot of big techs are really investing in household profiling. Amazon, for instance, has created the possibility of household profiling already in 2016. We have Google has done the same. We have Facebook that has actually requested a patent to predict the household members from within families online, right? And so basically, I look at. I mean, I can't summarize everything I explore in these chapters, but the home life data chapter and the social media data chapter both focus on this idea that most of the data that we have of children is often taken from adult profiles. And so, and it's always connected to a household profile. And I also showed that actually gathering data of children from adult profile should be illegal, right? So it shouldn't be happening, but it's happening a lot, right? So those two. So basically, the central part of the book is focusing on these different types of data, and then the last part of the book is really about reflecting what's going on. I mean, if you look at this from a social perspective, from an anthropological perspective, or from even like a critical perspective, what is happening to us really. And the chapter 7, the Datafied Citizen, tries to explore this idea, because it argues that the rise of surveillance capitalism has brought a fundamental shift in the construction of the public self. And in the chapter I use anthropological theory of personhood, and I combine that also with media communication theory on the digital self, right? And what I show is that we are no longer only digital citizens, that we self-enact online, but we are all becoming datafied citizens, because we are allowing a system that whereby the data traces that are collected from us are made to talk for and about us in public. And the majority of cases precede our ability to tell our story, right? Now, children are particularly vulnerable to this process because they're the very first generation of citizens that is being datafied from before birth. And the implications of this, so we do not know. Like many of you do not know what my grandfather thought about politics, or whether my mom smoked during pregnancy. But what we're doing at the moment is we're creating all these data traces that could that could precede the ability of children to construct themselves and their public self. So this is something that I show in the book, and I think that it's something that is very interesting that we need to reflect on. But also we need to reflect on another fundamental aspect that is going on, which is the fact that big tech companies are building unique ID profiles of individuals, bringing together different forms of data. So they collect data. So a company like Google collects a lot of data from everyday family practices like Google Maps, Gmail, and now Google. Like I have my Gmail account and my daughter's account. They're all there, right? It's good. So from the services that we use, Google collects all that data. But Google is also, especially in countries like the UK and the US, Google is investing massive amount of money in the education sector. So it's gathering a lot of data from schools. It's investing incredible amount of money in projects in the health sector. And in the UK, you have a very good example of this. And it's investing a lot of money in social media and in home technologies. So basically what Google is doing is collecting data from the school, the health, the hospital, the doctor, the home, and social media, and from all the services that it's offering to us, right? And this is something that we need to understand, that these technologies, these companies have the possibility through biometric technologies to re-identify all that data, not only through biometric technologies, also with other. So what we need to understand is really that they're creating unique ID profiles of individuals, and possibly from birth, and they're able to follow them up until the day that they're dead. And so the last chapter of my book, I reflect on the implications of this all, and I focus really on the idea of whether the profiles that are being built about us are accurate. Are even accurate. We know that they're biased, but are they accurate? And this is something from an anthropological and ethnographic point of view that is clear. When you look at how people use technologies, they use technologies in such messy ways. And often my data traces are so devoid of my intention, of my desire, of my context, that the thought of being judged on the basis of those inaccuracies, it's terrifying. And so basically in the data justice chapter, I looked at the critical data theory on algorithmic bias and algorithmic unaccountability and algorithmic inaccuracy. And I introduced for the very first time, a concept that I'm working on at the moment, which is the human error project. The human error idea. The idea that most of our algorithmic predictions are based on a fundamental human error and a misconstruction construction of human nature, because they are biased, because they are all often inaccurate, because they're often unaccountable, and because they're often shaped by ideologies that are rooted in Western scientific racism or Western or ideas of human nature that are misconstrued, right? And so this is it for me today. And I wanted to tell you that actually it's the very idea of the human error is something that I'm working on at the moment. And I'm launching a new project, which is called the Human Error Project, which is really aimed at shedding light to the fact that the race of AI innovation is defined by a stereotypical and misconstrued understanding of human nature, but also by a conflict about what it means to be human, going back to the ideas of Marshall Sahlins of the Western illusion of human nature, or also David Graeber and many Escobar on the pluriverse. So the project really draws on anthropological theory and combines this theory with critical data research to try to shed light on the conflicts that are emerging of what it means to be human and how we understand human nature with reference to algorithmic profiling. But yeah, that's me there. Actually, that's a photo of me in the Alps, which is quite close to my home town in Milan, and I do feel a bit closer to home here. So yes, thank you. And you can contact me on Twitter, or this is my email, and I'm open to questions now.
Thank you so much, Veronica. That was so great. So interesting, and it's really always for me interesting to hear about autoethnographic practices as it becomes more mainstream within anthropology. So it's really exciting and such a kind of accessible or universal way that people can conduct autoethnographic research, because one of the most interesting parts about this book is you show how this affects everyone, and it's not just, it's kind of making academia more relatable, which is so important, right? Particularly anthropology can tend to get quite abstract and kind of move away from lived experience of people reading the books. But what your work does is it brings it down and makes it accessible not just to anthropologists, but really to everyone. It's so interesting. I can see a lot of people have questions already. Zoe, do you have anything before we start taking questions?
I'm actually really impressed with myself because I'm feeding with one hand. No, I don't, but thank you very much. That was really interesting. I said it in the chat earlier, but you can ask your questions in the chat if you want us to read them out for you, or you can raise your hand, as I see some people already have, and you can ask the question yourself. Please feel free to turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable, but no pressure if you don't want to. Thank you very much.
Great. So I will call on people in order that I can see them. If I keep missing you, just let me know in the chat. So let's start with Jennifer. You're first in my line.
Okay, hi. I think my internet connection is not really great at the moment, so if I break up, sorry about that. Thank you so much, Veronica, for the talk. It was really super interesting, and I've been actually following your work for quite a while, also when it was focusing on activism, so I'm really happy that I could listen to you today. And I have a question which goes a bit back to the beginning of your talk, where you were speaking about how there's a really big focus on what people do, like the habit, and you kind of this idea of people getting addicted to technology and so on. And I was kind of wondering about this disparity between the focus on what, like, you know, how much you use it compared to what actually happens behind the scenes when people talk about children and their relationship with digital media. And I myself, I'm a PhD student, and I'm looking at how young people use digital technologies for their memory work. And I have been doing some field work in a school in London. And to me, it was quite surprising how much Google is present. And I think in the discourse of the school, there was also a lot of talk about setting very strict rules. And if children take out their phones in school, it's a sort of technology misuse, as the school has dubbed it. But the talk about what happens with all the children's data was never part of the concern, because of course children are vulnerable, they need to be protected. So I was just kind of wondering what your ideas are about this disparity, because to me it feels like it's a bit like a neoliberal focus on people improving themselves instead of kind of focusing what companies do a lot. But I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
How are we gonna do this? I'm gonna answer each question, or are we gonna take a few questions? Sonia, I like your cat.
Let's do 3 at a time, if that's okay with you, Veronica.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Okay, so next on my list is Valentina. If you wanted to ask something.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. Sorry for the mask. I'm on campus, so it's like the rule. But my question was more about pregnancy tracking apps, and if in your research you saw any difference between Americans and in the UK, because I know the healthcare system is a bit different, and I know in the US some like employers have like contracts with Ovia, and they use that data in like different ways. So I was wondering if any research. So I'm writing about that, and I did some research on like Brazil, and in Brazil they don't. It's not really that popular. So I think like the cross-cultural is very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next one is Sonia.
Really? I don't think I.
Exactly. How did Sonia come up?
You somehow
I
managed
think I was next, but I'll go not to faff around. Okay. Thank you very much, Veronica. I would love to hear you say something in answer of the so what question. And I don't ask that lightly, but I do hear from a lot of children and parents, so what? So they have my data. What's going wrong? And I'm interested in whether you answer that question in terms of a kind of a harm framework or a rights framework, or I think at the end you kind of came to a justice framework, and I'm just, so are there different ways of answering that question, and how do you make your choice about which way to go? What is going to be most compelling, especially if you want to make it illegal, if you want to kind of reach out to that kind of consequence of these this datafication?
Okay. Should I answer these 3 questions and then we can go for the other? Okay. So the first question was the Google Classroom, and it was oh gosh, remind me again. It was a Google Classroom, and the first one.
It was about the disparity between the discourse of like what children do with technology and like how much data is actually collected when they're in school.
Okay, so okay, so I think the real problem with the technologies increasingly more is that, especially with the pandemic, but also and we saw the pandemic is actually quite interesting in this regard, because it kind of put into the light processes that were happening already, and that they started to become more visible. So going to the Google Classroom, for instance, one example that I use is it's quite interesting in the education chapter, because I talked about this North London school, which and it's a case of this mother that actually she shared a lot of the private documents of the Northern London school. I can't say the school or anything, but it's quite interesting because she shared the emails of the parents who were concerned about the children's data, and the answer of the principal. And in the answer of the principal, there was no way. It was very, very badly informed, the principal. So she was saying things. Oh no, we do not open a Google Mail of children, of course. But then you're actually opening an account. You know? So she said, and then things like, oh yeah, but it's GDPR compliant, so it's fair enough. You know? So and it's these tensions, and it didn't make any sense. The answer really didn't make any sense, and that was quite fascinating, because it kind of really made me realize how little negotiation, how little debate there is, and how little education there is of these things. So I think, well, so when it comes to children and data, I am terribly, terribly ignorant. I think Sonia is the expert in the room, but because it's true, because I had a completely different focus. You know, like I looked at the environments that were producing the children's data, but I didn't really look at what children thought about that. And Sonia has done amazing research on this, I think. And I think that that's very important to point out, that because I had a different mission, which was kind of talking about injustice and citizens and things like that. So yeah, but that was the big limitation also of the Child Data Citizen Project. The second question was about, go again, sorry.
It was about the pregnancy tracking app.
Oh, yeah, the pregnancy tracking, yeah, and the difference between the US and the UK context. Right, one thing that I do with the pregnancy tracking apps, as I did in my article, Baby Valence, is really to show how often we have the tendency to talk about apps as if they were just the same thing. And actually, once you start analyzing the different apps, they have very different information ecologies. So in the article that I use, I actually use Bonnie Nardi's idea of information ecology to really show how all the different pregnancy apps and tracking apps are culturally specific, right? I also show, however, that there was they rely on a very similar economy of data extraction and accumulation, but we have to understand this cultural specificity. Now, in the US, we also have to understand the main difference between the US data environment and the health data environment. And the UK health data environment, because in the US, the health insurance is connected to your employment. And so, for instance, the example that you mentioned before of Dana Miller in Los Angeles, who discovered that her pregnancy app was selling aggregated data to her employer. They are real things that are happening. Employers are promoting wellness benefit packages for pregnant women, and the data is shared back to the employer. If you're interested in researching further this, another thing that I think it's very interesting to read is a report by the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, which is called the Pregnancy Panopticon. And it's a really interesting report because it actually traces back who buys the data, right? So who are those companies that buy the data? And you actually realize that Google buys a lot of this data from pregnancy apps and so on, right? So and that's quite interesting, again, thinking about the monopoly of big tech. So to answer Sonia's point about how do I respond to the so what question. Well, I often responded as an historical transformation, right? So because at the moment what we are seeing is the increased use of AI technologies that are scraping all types of data from all over to make predictions about families and about individuals and citizens, right? And yes, to answer your question, I often frame it more in terms of justice and civic rights, right? But I also kind of show concrete examples of this. Like many times we don't realize the extent of it. And at the moment I'm writing a new book, actually all in Italian, which is such a nice job. Like I mean, such a nice experience. I'm loving it. But where I am looking at this example of Clear. I don't know if you have ever heard of Clear in the US. Clear is a database that is basically made with the information of 400 million citizens. And the information of this collated for 400 million citizens is actually taken by 80 companies providers that provide home tech. So it could be smart TV, it could be gas, water, and many different other types of providers, right? So and Clear is actually, if you go on their website, they use it for federal investigations, for fraud detection, for immigration breaches, for child protection. But so when parents say, so what? I'm actually saying, well, I talk about the very rapid historical transformations that are happening at the moment, and the fact that we don't really realize what's happening, and that we have to take a step back. So that's my approach. But I see other three questions. So.
Great. So if we can take, thank you so much for those questions, and thanks Veronica for answering. If we can take, next in my list is Nadia's question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Veronica. It's great to listen to your results and your observations, because it really gives a deep insight in things that are going on. And I saw that Lisa Dencik also did a review of your book already, and she and her colleagues like Lisa Joanna Redden and so on made really serious and very important research on how the relatives of children are used for scoring the risk level of the families, and also the later grown-ups which still are children in child protection cases in the UK. And I think on the background of these developments, what you are researching on is really, really important to show where those data are produced that are used in these kinds of scoring. And I have two questions. So one question is in the context of your data. We did some interviews with children and their parents on parenting practices in the family some years ago, and made a qualitative study on this. And what really startled us was that we also had a very contrasting sample, and we had parents, also fathers, but also mothers, who were very technically savvy. They had jobs in IT companies and so on, and they knew about data issues. But in the private family life, dealing with the data of their children, this somehow had disappeared or whatever. We only had the interview data and we couldn't go deeper into it. So my question is, number one is, did you see something like this as well? And do you have any more explanations or observations on this? Yes. And my second question is, you are coming in the end of your book, which I ordered already, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. You're talking about algorithms and the question, well, we have this bias problem and so on. And we have now, since 2 or 3 years, a big debate about algorithm ethics. So my question would be, does it make any sense to talk about algorithm ethics in this context when we have these problems? So this would be my second question. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, should we take the other questions? I was excited about these questions, but we can take another couple of questions and then.
Thanks, Nadia. Next in my list is Alex.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I'm doing it from a phone, which I usually don't do, so I'm not sure how that works. So thank you very much. Thanks also for timing it so perfectly so I could put down my youngest and get him to fall asleep while listening to the talk over my phone while he was falling asleep. So that was thematically fitting. My question is, I really enjoyed the entire talk. I really felt a lot of the points as both a parent and a digital media researcher, and I'm planning as well to read the book once it gets to me. So my question is a bit more of the type of question that you ask in such a book presentation, and which is, what weren't you feeling comfortable putting in the book? What are the things, the presuppositions, the extrapolations, the thoughts that you had that you just weren't sure enough about putting in the book, but you would like to share them with us? So for example, about the future of datafied citizenship from child, or about the more shadier practices that you felt were happening but couldn't, prove them in big scare quotes. So would you mind sharing with us some of those, which I would find delightful? Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. It's a great question. Can you share what you haven't shared? And finally, the next question is Davina.
Hello, thank you. This was such a wonderful talk, and I have so many questions now, but I'm going to limit myself to 2 questions if possible, if allowed. The first stems from the slide that you presented on ethnography as question and theory. So you spoke about two practices there. You spoke about sharenting, but then how would you characterize the first practice? I'm sorry if it's a silly question, but I mean, there's a lot that we log on into our phones, into apps, into social media, digital media on an everyday basis. And I would say that there's this moral spin on things when it comes to sharenting, which might not apply to the first practice. So my question is, how would you characterize the first practice? Because you would be using the pregnancy app for example, the pregnancy app with this idea in mind that I'm doing something good for myself and my baby, but you're sort of involuntarily giving out a lot of data, because I may assume, and it might be a false assumption, not everybody reads all the data policies when we're signing up for an app. And my second question is, I mean, it's rather serendipitous that Nadia's and my questions were sort of clubbed together, is because there was a point where we were talking about the network self, but with apps like TikTok, we've kind of moved from the network self to the algorithmized self. So it's just, to quote Amy Orban, we're just getting outpaced by technology. And how do we even deal with this? I feel like the digital or social media literacy movements focus too much on the individual. How do we kind of spin it and get regulation to also be part of it? I don't know if it makes sense. I hope it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. So privacy, attitudes toward privacy and the parents, Nadia, I had the completely same experience. I remember actually sitting down with one parent towards the end of my research, and she was just like, yeah, you know what? I do not have the time to think about privacy. So please do not ask me about privacy. I don't really want to think about it. And she said, I might be making a really bad disservice to my children for the future, but I just have too much at the moment to think about this. And I think that this is something that I often came across, and also very well-educated parents. They would come up with the classical trade-off idea, or the privacy. I know this is a bit of a paradox, but this is what I am, right? So and I had a lot of that, and data was not very interesting, was not a really interesting topic, right? So that was not what they were interested in talking about, right? And I think that when I framed questions about data, that was where the least interesting things came out, right? So when I actually started saying, what do you think about privacy? Are you worried about this? And there are two reasons why I think that's happening. One is because really people do not have the time. And we are really juggling such difficult and intensive lives that we do not, at the moment, it's practically impossible to have the time to read the data policies of all the technologies that we encounter, right? And it's not a justification, it's really what's happening. And I think the structure of the system is pretty much that reinforces this. Also, the other thing is that we have privacy experts, and we have GDPR regulations that are so difficult to understand, especially. So most of the debates about privacy are really inaccessible to parents. And so I think in my work, what I really tried to do was to try to go around those questions, because I found the answers to the questions so not exciting, qualitatively exciting. And I actually let them talk more about their biographical experience, I started kind of asking them, how did you start realizing that something was going on, or did you? And that comes really out really well in the interviews, I think. So that's what I did. And to answer your question more on my new project, which is the Human Error Project, I agree with you. I think, to be honest, at the moment, the very talk about AI ethics as something that we can fix with the technology is fundamentally flawed, because it doesn't recognize the human error within algorithms. It actually starts from the idea that algorithms can read people. They might get it wrong because they might be biased. They might get it wrong, but we can fix them. And we can fix them if we give them good data, or we do. And this idea in itself, I think it's completely flawed. And I'm not the only one. There's so much research out there that is arguing the same. What I try to do with the Human Error Project is really trying to see how we coexist with this, right? So for instance, I'm very much interested in the anthropology, how anthropology has dealt historically with cultural bias. And in anthropology, cultural bias has been something that they didn't try to put on a side or to fix. That would have been wrong in the first place. But actually, they tried to coexist with it through reflexive ethnographic practice and so on. So that's something that I'm really interested in developing through the Human Error Project. Now, in terms of the question of if there is something that I didn't share in my book, there is actually, it's something that I don't know if I'm still ready to share. It's something about my family history that really upsets me, and that I've been negotiating with it for many years. And in terms of especially when it comes to social values and political values, and I think that what I am mostly, and that was one of the reasons why I actually came up with the Child Data Citizen Project, because it was this idea. I was very much interested in Hegel's idea of political identity, and how political identity is often constructed from within the family and from the interaction with the outside world. But also this idea that political identity is often constructed through a process of self-approximation and self-distancing from the values of family. And what I really find worrying about the system that we built over the last 20 years and the AI technologies that we're building now is the fact that, as Taylor shows, we're not being profiled on the basis of our own individual practices. I, Veronica Barassi, I'm not being profiled just because I scroll on Amazon or do something. Yes, I am also that, but I'm actually being profiled on the basis of the collective. And so I think that when we're talking about children and the child as datafied citizen, we're actually talking about the impossibility for children to be able to distance themselves from those values of the family that they do not understand, or that they do not agree with as they're growing up. And it's quite interesting. And in the book, there's this fantastic interview with Maya, which is I found that, and it's about sharenting as well. It's in my sharenting chapter. Oh no, it's not much. It's my datafied citizen chapter. But there is this interview with Maya where she tells me, oh yeah, I build this image. I post all the time about what it means for my son to live with two mothers, and I was like, oh right. So are you worried about the narrative that you're building about him? And it's like, well, no. I mean, I share a lot of issues about what he eats, so I'm sure that people know something about his health, about what activity he does. So most probably people can profile him on that. Ooh, they might be able to profile him also politically, because I shared a photo of him at a rally with Hillary, and there's a photo of Hillary and the baby face, because obviously we were during the elections at the time, right? And then I was like, oh gosh, that's a lot of information. Aren't you worried that he might not want to embrace your values? And he was like, and she's like, oh no, but we believe in these values and they're really important for us. So if somebody doesn't accept them, it's fine. And then I was like, all right, but what, do you share the same values of your mom? And she's like, no, my mom was a Christian Republican. And I was like, all right. And then I was like, and she was like, and I was like, right. And how would you feel if you had photos of you as a baby at a rally that it was a Republican rally? And she's like, oh, you don't think about that, do you? And she was like, oh yeah, you don't think about that. I'm just thankful that the internet was not out there back then. And I always use this quote because I find it so interesting in the development, because it's like what Alicia and Sonia have argued in the article on parenting. When you're really talking about the social media identity of people, you're really talking about this collapse of the boundary of the public self. So parents share their stories, and they feel that it's important to share their story. There is a real social and anthropological mission in that, in some ways. I mean, many times, And for her, it was very important because it was about sharing the experience of having a gay marriage and raising a child, right? So there was a real political intent and social intent in there. But of course, that completely impacted on the creation of the child's public self. And she ended it, she's like, oh my gosh, what happens if he wants to become a Republican candidate? And that's her question. So, but I find it's quite interesting. And that's what I love about ethnography, that you're kind of confronted with this kind of everyday contradictions, and which I find really rich and beautiful. And to go back to talking about parenting, to the last question about parenting, whether there is definitely a difference in practices on how people post on social media, or whether they use apps. And in the conversation about apps, there is what I often teach in my surveillance classes, this tension between surveillance as power and control, and surveillance as care. And in family, surveillance as care and control, they keep on overlapping, right? And obviously interactivity has enabled that constant overlap. Like for instance, in my article on baby violence, and I'm actually re-looking at a lot of the data from that project because for the new book. And I actually came across some aspects that I didn't explore in my baby violence article, about how people were participating through pregnancy apps. So how many of the pregnancy apps were actually downloaded by the partner or the grandmother, and there you have all these comments of people saying, like the grandmother saying, oh, I can actually share the experience with my daughter, this is phenomenal. And then there is this comment of this husband saying, oh, I know exactly what's going on in my wife's body. Now I know what she should eat and she shouldn't eat. And I often tell her what she should eat and she shouldn't eat. And she's not very happy that I have access to this data. So the link between control and care when it comes to tracking and data tracking, and I talk quite a bit in the book about this, is very blurred. So and also I am also quite against the idea of parenting as something negative. I actually believe that it's not that parents are doing something bad, and all those moral panics about parenting are often constructed around theorizing around bloggers, but that's an excessive form of our society. And so, and also they're not really taking into account how much has changed between 2016 and today in terms of the negotiations that go on in family life, and how much parenting is actually causing a lot of tensions within the family. So yeah.
Oops. Thank you all so much. It's really good questions, and it's really interesting to hear about it more in depth. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left if anyone has any further questions. No, I think Zoe is busy with baby Dylan.
Well, he's on the edge.
Oh.
He's definitely on the edge, but I'm really glad I was able to stay for the whole thing. And I think that this, oh no, I think this timing worked out very well for everyone.
Yeah, it's the evening. I don't know if you heard the little footsteps
It's really
behind me going to bed.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Veronica.
No, thank you so much. And guys, there's so many chats that I haven't been able to read through the presentation. Just drop me an email and I'll get back to you so that I'm not gonna miss that. Okay.
We have one more question here from Rita. If you want to answer it quickly, it's in the chat about some advice.
Oh, well. The problem is that the more time passes, the more the big tech become completely closed walls to research at the moment. I'm not sure if you were following the ethics research at Google, but increasingly more you have like really top researchers trying to access that type of data. Or try to access proper independent research within these companies, and it's becoming increasingly impossible. So I'm not really sure what to advise in terms of ethnography, in terms of digital ethnography. I think platform analysis for me was a good way to get out of that limitations that you can encounter with the big tech, right? But again, platform analysis is one ethnographic aspect of platform analysis that is quite frustrating, is that it makes you always feel that you're guessing. You know, you're reading privacy policies and you're thinking, am I really sure that I understanding this correctly? Are they saying what I think they're saying? Because it's all like this kind of double guessing game, which I think in itself is a research finding. But I find that quite interesting. Actually, another work that I found really interesting is keep on doing that, is keep on an eye on patent requests, because patent requests actually make you understand the next steps. And then phrase things and questions in those terms. So, yeah, that's good. Good.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for having me. It was very nice. And yeah, and just drop me an email or you find me on Twitter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And we're gonna put this on our YouTube channel today.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
I don't know whose computer. If it's on your computer, Branwen, send it to me.
I will do.
And we don't know what our next event is because we haven't organized it yet, but
we'll let you know
about it when it happens.
We're gonna keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Well done, Zoe. Really good luck with that. You did amazing. Bye, Dylan.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.